Hi, my name is Jane Epstein, and I am a survivor of sibling sexual abuse and trauma. My trauma began when I was about 5 or 6 years old. I was laying in bed watching TV with my siblings. My oldest sibling is 6 years older than me, and the middle sibling is 4 years older than me. And my mom had called out and she said, "Hey kids, it's time to get ready for bed." I was a 5 year old little girl. I started changing clothes into my pajamas, and my 12-year-old sibling recalls looking at me and thinking, I need to know more, which is common. Sibling sexual abuse and trauma often starts out as curiosity, which is how my situation did start out. On some level, I knew it was wrong, but I didn't understand what was happening and what was wrong about it. I didn't fully understand what the trauma I had experienced and the damage it had created until I was 45 years old. I always played in the basement, and his bedroom was in the basement. I don't recall how I ended up in his room, but my first memory I have is I feel I was laying on the floor, and the best way I can describe it is I felt like someone was touching me and looking at me like a science project. And like many people who suffer from trauma, I describe it as floating to the ceiling. And I can just look down at that little girl, and she didn't understand what was happening. She was confused. And then the abuse kind of progressed. And I recall different bedrooms in the home. I recall a bathroom in the home. And at some point, I definitely put it together that this may not be right. The thing is, my body responded to his touch. My body did not know that it was my sibling touching me. So my body responded to the touch. On some level, I enjoyed the touch, but on some level, I knew that was wrong. So I was conflicted. I wanted the attention, I wanted the touch, but I knew it was wrong. It didn't really land in my head that this was completely wrong. I just chalked it up to, it's two kids being curious. I was complicit because it even came to a point when I started seeking him out. I know that there was inappropriate touching and it felt very transactional. I was a plaything. I was a toy. I was an experiment. And I don't think that my sibling was looking at me as another human being. My sibling was 12, and when they reached an older age, about 17, they understood, wait a second, I might be hurting her. In fact, this is what they told me. They said that they watched the movie A Color Purple, and that's when they realized, oh, this might be harmful. And my sibling stopped. My sibling also at the same time went away to college, so it did end at that time. Looking back, I think that the way that this impacted me as a teenager is I always had a boyfriend starting from sixth grade, always chasing boys. It was always very important to me that I was receiving affirmation from boys. And when I didn't get it, I would chase them or call them and go down a path of unhealthy boundaries because my boundaries had been crossed. I also became very promiscuous at an early age and very transactional. I learned the power of using my body to get a male's attention. The only thing that didn't get is wasn't able to hold a male's attention because I gave it away so easily. It wasn't making love, it was me getting what I wanted from a man, and that was attention. I continued to try and seek attention well into my 20s. Deep down inside, I wanted to be loved. I wanted to be taken care of, but I was the tough girl. I would get in bar fights. I would get kicked out of the bar. I got punched at a bar. I never had trouble getting male's attention. I never had trouble getting a boyfriend. And that continued until the point where I had been hurt so many times, I had been dumped so many times that I was starting to fall apart. And that's right about the time that I started stripping. When I was 18, I barely graduated from high school because I had so many absences, and I started court reporting school. I kept getting this tug that I really wanted to get on stage. And when I was about 19 years old, I found a strip joint where you only had to be 18 to strip, and it was in a college town. So I began stripping at age 19. It actually really helped me. I think stepping on that stage for the first time really solidified my healing journey going forward. I stepped on that stage. I was terrified, but something told me I needed to do it. And so I got on the stage, and men are throwing money at you, telling you how pretty you are. And when you're not on stage, you have to walk around and you have to learn how to schmooze them and sell table dances and learn how to interact with men. And I learned a lot there. I got over a lot of my shyness. But as I stated, I was starting to slip down into a depression, and I was feeling like I couldn't get my heart broken one more time. And that's actually when I met my first husband. When I was at the strip club, there was a gentleman who would come in and he would tip me and he would disappear. I was just taken by him. So one day he came into the club. I was feeling particularly angry because there weren't many people there. I wasn't making any money and I was feeling cranky. And he walked in and he came up to the stage and he tipped me and he said something to me for the first time. He said, "What are you doing here? You look like the kind of girl that I would take home to meet my mom." And I knew that that was my in. And I responded so quickly. I said, "You always tip me and you leave right away. Why do you do that? Would you please stay?" And he said, "Okay, I'll stay, but you've got to come out right away." And I said, "Okay." So I finished my set and I raced to the back and I changed clothes because I had to get ready for my next set. I'm sure I put in some perfume, breath mint, and combed my hair and made myself all fresh. And I ran out and he's sitting at the bar. The best way I can describe it is I crawled up onto the bar stool next to him and I just knew. I knew that I was going to marry this man. I needed him. And that's not healthy either for a relationship, but I needed him. And he made me laugh. And we started dating and connecting. And it came to a point where he gave me an ultimatum. He said, "I can't see you on stage. That just tears me apart. I would love for you to move in with me and I'll get you back in school." And I actually struggled with that decision. As much as I wanted this man in my life, I was terrified that he would break my heart and I didn't think I could take it. Yet I needed the stage for my ego. So I actually struggled and we fought. And I feel like we almost didn't make it, but I ultimately did decide to move in with him and go back to school. I finally had the courage to leave the stage. My first husband, his name was Mark, he would shower me with gifts, love, and attention. And I would pick fights. I didn't understand why I was picking fights. Hindsight, looking back, I think I was trying to demolish the relationship because I don't think I felt worthy of his love. But yet he fully loved me and I fully loved him. I was able to make that transition. Instead of getting attention on stage, I went back to school and he would help me study and I started getting great grades. And I started realizing, wait, maybe I am smart. Maybe I do have something to offer the world because I'd spent a lot of time feeling dumb and less than. And so I think I was able to fill those gaps from my childhood and my trauma. So my late husband, he also filled a lot of the gaps. He was a father figure. He was my lover. He was my friend. So I was actually feeling pretty okay for most of our marriage. But about 7 years into it, I definitely started pushing him away and trying to sabotage it. Looking back, I think I was trying to sabotage the marriage again because I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel deserving. And he didn't know me. He didn't know the child that I was. He didn't know what had happened with my sibling and I. And I briefly mentioned it at one point, and he didn't really ask questions, and I wasn't offering answers because I was still thinking, that's just two kids being curious. It didn't mess me up. I don't know why I messed up, but it's not that. And I moved in with him and we finally got ready to get married and we got married and it was the perfect wedding. I planned everything perfectly and we were married for almost 7 years. And right before the 7 year mark, I started feeling depressed. I was starting to feel trapped and I was starting to push him away. I didn't understand why. Ultimately, it kind of didn't matter because shortly after I had a conversation with him telling him, look, I'm not happy. I feel like we need some help. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So when my husband was diagnosed with terminal cancer, nothing else mattered except fighting for his life. However, they had told us he had a 5% survival rate and it was not looking good. So at that point, I put all my troubles aside and I just full on gave him all my love and all my attention. And I was fortunate that I got to be able to take care of him. I surrendered. I just surrendered. And I realized that I had no control over what happened with him, over what happened with me. I didn't think that I could live without him. But on some level, I knew that I was going to have to. From diagnosis until death was 7 months. And I was with him when he passed. I'd asked him, I said, please just let me be with you when you pass. And he said, if I have any control, I will. And he was able to keep that promise. And I was with him on the day he passed. Through his diagnosis and his death, I was forced to feel. There was no hiding. I could not bury that amount of pain. So I just feel like someone ripped off all of my protective layers and said, you're just going to have to go through this and you're going to have to feel it. And when he died, I felt like, okay, I've been through sexual abuse. I've been a stripper. I've been through a death. Now I've got it. Life is going to be easy for me. This is my story. But unfortunately, my story was not over, because in my second marriage is when the childhood memories came back of the abuse, and then they refused to go back in their box. When the memories did come back, I was into my second marriage. And when I met my second husband, I had expressed to him, oh, yes, I lost my first husband, but everything's wrapped up. It's all in a pretty box. I'm fine. I wasn't fine, but I really believed that I was fine. And we were both older. I say older. I was 38, he was 39, and we both wanted to start a family, because when I lost my first husband, I realized, I thought, I really want to be a parent. I think that that's the only way that my heart's going to really open up again. And I really wanted to be a mom. So we got married. We were married in October. I was pregnant by November. Then I got pregnant again right away. So I had two children, a year and a week apart, both boys. And I was able to be a stay-at-home mom. We lived in a nice home in Pennsylvania. Things looked great. But then something happened in my marriage in the bedroom. And the best way I can describe it, it was dark. And I just recall my eyes popping open and feeling so much anger and rage. And I woke up the next morning angry, and that anger didn't go away. A memory had been placed of my sibling and myself, and it was not going to go back in the box. It was going to insist that I deal with it, but I still didn't talk about it. And for another 5 years, I was trying to just make it go away. The memory that had been placed was a specific memory of a time that I was actually seeking my sibling out. And that memory just kept coming at me and coming at me. And I had two toddlers. I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband was working long hours, and I was depressed and I was angry. And I thought, well, I'm in toddler hell right now. Of course I'm angry. Of course I'm depressed. Maybe it's, due to the pregnancies. I didn't know. But then I knew. It kept nagging at me. So my husband and we got through some very tough years, and I finally approached my now husband and I said, we need help. We need to go to counseling. And we were in counseling for 5 years, just turning over everything. We made progress. We were doing better, but I was still angry. I was still sad. And I'm a stay-at-home mom living in a great home and should be happy. What was wrong with me? And it was at that point, when I was 45 years old, I made a conscious decision. I decided, okay, I've been in counseling, I've been in therapy, I've tried to fix my husband, and I'm still not happy. Maybe there's something inside of me. Maybe it's me. When I had that realization that maybe there's something inside of me that isn't happy, that isn't working, I decided to stop, and I decided to start writing my story down. And I realized that my life had happened completely out of order. And it was at that point that I talked to our marriage therapist one-on-one without my husband there. And I said, there might be this thing. My brother messed with me when I was little, because that was all I could say. All I could say was messed with me. And the therapist was trying not to be alarmed, because this is the first time he's heard this in 5 years. He said, well, how long did this go on? And I explained that to him, and he said, that's a big deal. And I said, but aren't kids curious? And he said, yes, kids are curious, but not for 6 years. And he said, this explains a lot of your anger. It explains, why you don't feel worthy of being loved. It explains your defensiveness. It explains a lot of things. And this is a big deal, and you need to tell your husband. And I said, no, I don't want to tell my husband, because then he's going to know all of our marriage problems are my fault. Well, he said, you need to be able to tell your husband so you can feel safe, so that you can heal. I did tell my husband. We had a joint session maybe a week later, and I shared with Steve, my husband, that I was sexually abused by my older brother as a child. I didn't know what he was going to say. I didn't know what he was going to do, but he was quiet. And then he said, I'm sorry that happened to you. And that's all I needed. I needed someone to say, I'm sorry that happened to you. I didn't need someone to say, why didn't you tell me? Or now I know why you're so messed up, or you should forgive and move on. That was a long time ago. He didn't say any of those things. He was just quiet and said, I'm sorry that happened to you. Once I had told my husband and the therapist what had happened, and once I started understanding, okay, that was a big deal, I started writing my story down again. And it was there that I realized how it had impacted me, because I realized when I was 5 or 6, that I had sexual feelings that no 5 or 6-year-old should have, that then my body was trying to reenact those sexual feelings throughout adulthood, and that I viewed sex as a transaction. A few memories would come forward into my head, and I got very, very angry at my sibling, to the point where I just shut him and his whole family out. they were all dead to me. That also is the point when I shared with my mom what had happened, and she cried and she said, well, where was I? How did that happen? And then she started saying, you need to forgive, you need to move on, you can't blame your marriage problems on your brother. That was really hurtful. And I know that she was doing the best that she could with what she had, but I was doing the best that I could with what I had. As I started writing the story down and I had shut my sibling out, I kept hearing words that I needed to forgive. And then I actually received a message from one of my nieces. I was annoyed, but then I responded. Her response to me was, thank you so much for getting back to me. That means the world to me because I thought you hated me. It was at that point that I realized, whoa, wait a second. Now my trauma is impacting the next generation. And it was at that point I was able to write my sibling a letter of forgiveness. And he said, I received your letter. And he said, I was kind of surprised because I thought this was all over. And I said, it's not over, but I'm slowly healing. I'm slowly getting there. And I said, but I think part of my healing journey is that I need to talk about this. I need to raise awareness because I'm not the only 6-year-old little girl who went through this, and you're not the only 12-year-old little boy who went through this. Yet no one's talking about it. And he understood what I was saying and he agreed. And he said, I will support you in whatever way I can to help you heal. Because I think on some level, he understands that he's not the only child who did this. And I think he looks around at society and is concerned as well. When he said that he would support me, and I knew that I had the support of my husband, I knew that this was what I was supposed to do. I started a Facebook page and I started putting little tiny quotes out there and little tiny things. And I started receiving messages from other survivors. So I thought, okay, I need to keep talking about this. And I shared my story. It was terrifying and I felt like I was going to throw up after the fact. But then I started getting more people reaching out to me, and my husband still loved me. Even though he knew more and more about my story, he still loved me. And I thought, wow, I'm truly known and I'm still loved. Not everybody needs to be loud like me, but just sharing your story anonymously or finding a peer-to-peer support group and finding others like you. If you're a survivor of sibling sexual abuse, you're not alone. When I was in the pit of depression, I didn't like happy people, and I didn't want a survivor telling me that there is hope, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there is healing. I did not want to hear that because I needed to feel my pain. But I would like to tell you that there is hope and there is healing. I have not crossed that finish line. That finish line keeps moving on me, but I have come a very, very long way. I love, I feel loved, I feel worthy, and I feel known. And I can look at myself now. I'm no longer a victim. And I've actually slowly moved out of the phase of being a survivor. I can now finally look at this and say, that is a chapter of my life that happened. I can't remove it. It's a part of me. It's a part of who I am. And I love who I am. And I'm not going to change who I am. And I'm not going to send you positive quotes. I'm not going to tell you to move on and get over it. But I would like to share that there is hope and there is healing. It takes hard work, but it is there. Sibling sexual abuse and trauma is considered to be the most common form of sexual abuse in our homes. So I just don't want you to feel alone. And I hope that you can find peer-to-peer support group. And I hope that this message has reached you in some way or resonated with you in some way, and that you can start your healing journey.